Emma Reed was the kind of girl who never believed in fate. For her, life was about keeping her head down, working hard, and making it through the day without anyone noticing. On a hot Tuesday morning, she stopped to adjust her shirt in the reflection of a sleek black car window, completely unaware that someone on the other side of the glass was watching her. Someone who would unknowingly change everything she thought she knew about herself and the kind of life she deserved. Emma walked with her chin slightly lowered, as if her past was stitched into her shoulders. The sun was already high, stretching shadows across the pavement and glinting off parked cars. Her jeans were worn thin, her faded tank top clung awkwardly to her frame. She wasn't headed anywhere glamorous, just to the diner where she worked the morning shift. Still, she wanted to look at least a little put together. She paused when she noticed the spotless car at the corner. It was clearly expensive, the kind of car that didn't belong in her neighborhood. Its tinted windows reflected her like a mirror. She instinctively stepped closer to fix the slipping strap of her tank top. Her reflection showed a messy ponytail, faint shadows under tired eyes, no makeup. For a moment, she looked into her own eyes, then turned away and kept walking. What Emma didn't see was the man inside. Edward Montgomery hadn't moved for minutes. He sat silently, his phone tossed aside. He had no meeting here, no real reason to stop in this part of town. But being away from the glass towers of his world gave him room to breathe. That morning, he parked without thought until he saw her. Edward noticed how she didn't glance around, didn't try to pose or look beautiful. She didn't even realize how striking she was. There was an honesty in the way she studied her own reflection, almost like she didn't recognize the girl staring back. Vulnerability radiated from her, and it shook something inside him. He had seen women draped in diamonds, practiced in the art of seduction, but this girl with her second-hand jeans and weary eyes captured his attention without even trying. By the time Emma disappeared down the block, Edward still hadn't moved. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she mattered. But something in him had shifted, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel numb. Emma's world, by contrast, was built on routine. Wake up at 5:30, make cheap coffee, tie her hair back without looking in the mirror, walk the cracked sidewalks to the diner 6 blocks away. The building was old, its sign missing letters, the smell of burnt toast lingering in the air. Still, it was her job, her only stability since aging out of foster care 2 years ago. She wiped sticky tables, refilled chipped mugs with watery coffee, and ignored the customers who called her sweetheart like it was her name. At night, she caught the bus across town to her community college classes, chipping away at a nursing degree. Some nights she fell asleep on the bus and missed her stop. Some nights she sat through lectures with aching feet and an empty stomach. But she pushed on, not because she believed in happy endings, but because doing nothing was worse. Her past clung to her like a shadow. At 13, Emma had found her mother dead of an overdose in their cramped apartment. She remembered her hands trembling so hard she could barely dial for help. After that, it was foster homes, counselors who asked too much, and guardians who wanted a paycheck more than a child. Trust was something Emma had unlearned long ago. That's why, when she noticed the same black car circling the diner twice in one morning, unease coiled in her stomach. Maybe it was just a lost businessman, she told herself. But when she saw the same car later that day parked across the street as she hauled trash out back, her instincts sharpened. She knew what it felt like to be watched. Emma didn't tell anyone. She never did. She tightened her ponytail, pulled her hoodie closer, and reminded herself to stay alert. Life had taught her, strangers don't just appear in your world without wanting something, and nothing ever came without a cost. Even if someone was watching her, even if something was about to change. Emma had learned that hope was dangerous, it made you weak, and weakness never survived. Edward, meanwhile, was not a man who obsessed over strangers. His life was schedules and meetings, social obligations, and carefully controlled appearances. But that girl, the way she stared into the car window like it was the only mirror she owned, carved her way into his mind. He told himself he was curious. He told his assistant he was looking into urban renewal projects as an excuse to linger in that neighborhood, but he knew better. He wasn't watching the streets. He was watching her. One afternoon, parked down the block, Edward watched as Emma came outside in her plain diner uniform, dragging heavy trash bags to the alley. She moved like someone used to doing everything alone, like help had never been an option. To anyone else, she was ordinary. But to him, in her ordinariness was something unforgettable. He finally told his driver, Marcus, to find out who she was. Marcus didn't question it. After all, in all their years together, Edward Montgomery had never asked about anyone. Until now. Edward had never made a request like this before, and Marcus instantly understood that this wasn't business as usual. The very next day, Marcus handed him a slim folder. Inside was her name, her workplace, and a shallow background summary. Edward was stunned at how little there was to find. No known relatives, a string of foster homes, part-time student work, a spotless record, and an unremarkable, quiet existence. He could have chosen subtleties, someone to speak with her, orchestrated a chance encounter, but he wasn't interested in games. That wasn't what this was. So he walked into the diner himself. The first day, he slid into a back booth and ordered black coffee. She didn't acknowledge him. She poured his cup, cleared his plate, wiped the table beside him wordless. Yet he stayed, and then he returned. Again, and again. Always the same seat, always the same order. He observed how she dealt with rude patrons with unshakable calm. How she offered gentle kindness to the old man who showed up every Wednesday. How she carried herself like someone who had perfected invisibility. By the fourth visit, he found himself waiting, hoping for a glance, some fleeting acknowledgement, but she never looked. Oddly, her indifference only pulled him deeper. She wasn't impressed. She wasn't curious. She didn't care. What he didn't realize was that Emma had noticed him the very first day. She noticed everything. She just never reacted because reacting opened doors, and she no longer opened doors for anyone. She didn't know who he was, but something about him unsettled her. Too calm, too polished, too misplaced, and still. There was something strangely familiar in the way he looked at her, as though he were searching for something already lost. On the fifth day, Emma's patience cracked. The same man, the same table, the same unshifting silence. He wasn't creepy. He wasn't insistent of anything. His restraint made it more unnerving. Finally, coffee pot in hand, she stopped at his table, refilling his half-empty cup. Her voice was steady, though her eyes were sharp. "Lose something here?" she asked. 5 days. Same spot. He lifted his head slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips, though his eyes remained weighted. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I found it." She rolled her eyes, turning away, yet something about the softness in his tone, not flirty, but genuine, made her pause. Almost against her will, she glanced back. He didn't press, didn't call after her, just sipped his coffee and stared out the window, waiting for something even he couldn't name. Later, stepping outside for her short break, she saw him leaning casually against the wall. No phone, no drink, no distraction, just hands in his pockets and that same steady expression. "I'm not here to bother you," he said before she could speak. I like talking to you, even if it's only one sentence." Arms crossed, Emma eyed him coolly. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed, "but I'd like to." She smirked, shaking her head. "That line probably works better where you're from." "I didn't mean it as a line," he replied firmly, voice unpolished but sincere. "I meant it exactly as I said it." Something in his tone made her hesitate. He didn't look like a liar. He didn't look like anything, really, just a man slightly out of place in his own skin. "Look," he added, stepping back slightly. "No pressure, no games. Just, if you ever feel like some air, I know a spot nearby that serves better coffee than this place." She raised a brow. "You've been drinking this coffee all week." This time, his smile reached his eyes. "Exactly." That night, she didn't go, but she thought about it. The next day, when he returned and simply gave her a nod, without expectation, a strange flutter stirred in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. By the third time he asked, she said yes. Not because she trusted him. Not because she wanted anything, but because a small voice whispered, "Maybe not every door leads to pain. Maybe some lead to fresh air." Their first walk was quiet, but not the kind of silence that begged to be broken. An easy stillness, like two people sharing space without explanation. They wandered through a small park, cracked paths beneath trees that bowed low, benches faded by years of sun and rain. Emma barely spoke, and Edward didn't push. He seemed to know instinctively that pressure would send her retreating. He only walked beside her, hands tucked in pockets, glancing now and then as though to confirm she was still there. Still real. When she finally did speak, it wasn't idle chatter. "What do you do for a living?" He hesitated. Truth pressed at his tongue. "CEO of Montgomery Holdings, boardrooms, power, wealth." But her eyes stopped him. "I used to run a company," he said carefully. Right now, I'm just trying to remember who I was before that. Not a lie, but far from the whole truth. Emma didn't probe, didn't show surprise. She just nodded, as though she understood what it meant to lose pieces of yourself along the way. And so it continued. Walks after her shifts, sometimes in silence, sometimes with words carefully unwrapped. If she wanted to join, she did. If not, he left without complaint. No pressure, no demands, just presence. Piece by piece, she opened stories she hadn't told in years, her first night in foster care, sleeping in shoes because she didn't know if she'd need to run, reading medical texts in the library because she couldn't afford internet or school, the night she saved a neighbor from an overdose, the moment she knew she wanted to be a nurse. She spoke calmly, carefully, like pain was glass that had to be handled gently. Edward listened, and when he spoke, it wasn't about power or money. He told her about his brother, killed in a car crash when they were teens, about the silence that swallowed his parents afterward, about success that felt like scaling an endless mountain, every triumph more hollow than the last, and how somehow, this woman, this stranger, had steadied the ground under his feet. There was no romance, not yet, no flirtation, just two broken histories laid bare under street lamps and quiet skies. But with each walk, something unshakable was taking root until one rainy Thursday, at a city overlook where the lights blinked like distant stars, he finally broke. The truth pressed against his ribs until he could no longer keep it in. There's something I haven't told you, he said quietly. Her eyes sharpened instantly. My name is Edward Montgomery. I own Montgomery Holdings. And I didn't end up in that diner by chance. I went back because I wanted to know you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma rose slowly, stepping back, her gaze harder than anger. So this was some kind of game. You just walked into my life because you were bored. No, he tried. It wasn't like that. Don't, she snapped. Don't say my name like it belongs to you. He stumbled to explain how he hadn't planned any of it, how he hadn't expected to feel. But her face had already closed. I let you in, she whispered. I don't do that. Not ever. I know. I didn't want to lie, but you did. She cut in, her voice flat now. You watched me. You dug into my life. That's not honesty. That's control. He reached out, not to touch, just to bridge the gap. But she stepped back again. I thought you were like me, she said. Turns out, you're just another rich man playing with things he doesn't understand. And then she was gone. No backward glance. No hesitation. Only the abandoned paper cup of tea cooling on the wall where she had sat. For weeks, Emma disappeared. No calls, no texts, no trace. Her number disconnected, her social media erased, her job at the diner gone, without a forwarding word. She had vanished cleanly, efficiently. At first, Edward told himself he had to respect it. That vanishing was her choice. But the ache told him otherwise. He knew he had hurt her, even if he never meant to, and she had every right to walk away. Yet every morning he woke with the same silent hope that her name might appear on his phone. Every night he lay awake, not with guilt, but with the sharp ache of her absence. The silence she left behind screamed louder than any argument they could have had. He wandered back to the street where it had all begun, the cracked sidewalk, the faded car window that had once mirrored her face. Parking nearby, he sat for hours, wondering how such a small moment could have spiraled into something that had changed his life forever. He retraced their steps, lingered at the corners where they had paused, and sat on the bench where she'd once told him about saving her neighbor. Her voice replayed endlessly in his mind. And with it came the crushing realization. The trust she had given him was rooted in honesty. And that was exactly what he had broken. For the first time in years, Edward picked up a pen. No emails, no texts, just paper, something real. At the kitchen table of his penthouse, which felt emptier than ever, he wrote. The words came jagged and uneven, but he didn't stop until the page was full. He didn't beg her to return. He didn't make false promises. He simply gave her the truth, everything unsaid, when it mattered most. He admitted he had watched her at first because he hadn't understood his feelings, that he had lied by omission and regretted it every day since. He confessed that meeting her was the only unscripted, genuine moment of his life, and that even if forgiveness never came, he would always hold on to the version of himself she helped him discover. He mailed the letter to the only place he could think of, the rundown apartment where Marcus had once found her roommate's name. There was no guarantee she'd ever see it, but it was the last fragile thread he had left. Days slipped into weeks. No reply. Nothing. Until one evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Edward returned to the place where it all began. He sat on a bench near the sidewalk, hands folded, expecting nothing. The street lights flickered awake, shadows stretched long, and just as he rose to leave, he heard footsteps. He didn't turn. Not yet. And then her voice. Quiet, steady. "I got your letter." His chest tightened. He rose slowly, heart hammering. She was there, a few feet away, wrapped in a hoodie-like armor, her eyes unreadable. But she hadn't run. Not this time. "I didn't know if I should come," she whispered, "but I didn't want to disappear forever." "I'm glad you didn't," he replied. Silence stretched, heavy and fragile, until she took a single step closer. It was enough. He didn't move, didn't reach for her, just waited, the same way he had in the beginning. And then, wordlessly, she sat beside him on the bench, arms wrapped around her knees. For now, that was enough. A year later, the city looked unchanged: cracked sidewalks, flickering lights, rusted fire escapes, but to Emma, everything felt lighter. She walked with steadiness she never thought she'd own. Her scrubs were wrinkled, after a long shift, but pride shone in the way she wore them. The name tag on her chest read Emma, RN. Every time her eyes caught it, a small piece of her healed. The clinic stood at the corner where abandoned shops once lingered. Now children played outside while parents waited for checkups, or simply stopped to chat. Inside, warm colors replaced sterile white walls. Staff called each other by first names. It wasn't just a clinic, it was a place built on second chances. Edward had sold part of Montgomery Holdings to fund it, not as a grand gesture, not to prove his worth, but because he believed in what she dreamed of, and because he no longer believed success meant stock tickers and skyscrapers. For the first time, his wealth felt like a tool, not a mask. Their relationship was not a fairy tale. There were arguments, sleepless nights, and days filled with doubt. But there was growth, slow forgiveness, and trust rebuilt layer by layer. Emma still carried her instincts, her caution, but she no longer lived in survival mode. Edward had learned to listen, not just hear. Together, they met each other not in perfection, but in progress. There was no diamond ring, no dramatic proposal. One quiet night, curled on the couch with takeout boxes scattered around, Emma had looked at him and said softly, "I'm not going anywhere, you know." Edward smiled, leaned in, and whispered, "Good, because I'd have followed you anywhere." Sometimes they passed the old spot where she had once fixed her shirt in his car's reflection. Emma would laugh, shaking her head. "I was just fixing my top," she'd say. "And I was just avoiding my life," he'd reply. That cracked window had better timing than either of them. The beauty of their story wasn't in perfection, it was in the realness. Two people from opposite worlds, scarred in different ways, had built something steady. Emma no longer flinched. From her own reflection, she saw someone strong, someone loved, someone home. Because their story wasn't about rescue. It was about recognition to souls, daring to choose honesty, forgiveness, and vulnerability, even after years of walls. And in that choice, they found something far more lasting than any fairy tale could offer.